All right, so who remembers where we left off last week? The burning bush. Thank you. Good job, Joshua. I didn't even get a chance to throw a trick question out at you. I was about to ask Genesis, but nope. Joshua nailed it. So we left off with Moses at the burning bush, and y'all remember what's going on at this bush, right? You see this bush, it's on fire, but it's not being consumed. There's a whole lot that we could say about this, but we're not going to necessarily dwell on this whole exchange. But what in essence is happening at the burning bush? What is God doing? Okay, he's talking to Moses. Yes. Were you going to say something different from that? You were going to say the same thing. Okay. All right. But what's he doing with Moses? What's his plan now? Okay, he's going to give him a mission. Okay, to save his people. He's sending them back to Israel, right? Now, he is in the land of Midian at this point, and you get to see my great artistic skills here once again. You have kind of Egypt down in this area, and you have what's called the Sinai Peninsula, and then over here in this area, and by the way, this is really bad and not to scale, but hopefully you have the idea. Over here is Midian. So he's made his way across the Sinai Peninsula. He's over in this area, and that's where he's settled himself, established a brand new life. So he's somewhere here. We don't know. He's just taking care of his father-in-law's flocks, and he sees this thing. He goes up, he has a conversation. God says, I'm sending you back. Why is he hesitant to go back? This you have to remember from our discussion last week. Why is he hesitant to go back? Okay, so things are going to kill him. Yes?
He's already been rejected once.
Okay, all right. Now, Samuel says he thinks they're going to kill him. He's a wanted individual in Egypt. By whom? Okay, well, by Pharaoh, right? The Egyptians, he's a wanted individual because of what he did approximately 40 years ago. And then as Jeff points out, not only do the Egyptians want him dead because of that, but he's already been rejected as somebody who's a leader of Israel to bring them out. He tried it, and it failed 40 years ago. And so he's like, that's not going to happen. And he starts saying, well, here's a problem. I don't have any authority. Who am I supposed to tell them has sent me? I have to come with some kind of authority because they reject mine. He says, well, tell them that the I am one, Yahweh, has sent you. And he's like, well, they're not going to listen to me. And I can't speak in this kind of a way, which obviously we know that he is fully capable of doing such because he does. But God's like, I already got that taken care of. Aaron's on the way, and you now see a dynamic duo that's created with Aaron and Moses. And throughout the majority of their time, those two are together in various things that happen, except in very key places where they're on the wrong side. Some of them, Aaron might be on the wrong side of things. But finally, what is it that he says that finally makes God angry? Anybody remember? Anybody remember what he says that makes God angry? No, that actually didn't make God angry. The I speak well did not make God angry. God said, no problem. I'll take care of that. You got this issue? No problem. I'll take care of that. You got this issue? No problem. I'll take care of that. You got this issue? No problem. But there's one thing Moses says that unless I'm mistaken, and I could be, but unless I'm mistaken, it is the first time that you see God getting angry, that those words are used in the Bible. Anybody know? Okay. Uh,
Exodus 14:13, please, Lord, now send a message by whomever you will. The next verse says, then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses.
all right, very good. Say that again. Where did you read that?
Chapter 4, verse 13 to 14.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. I heard 13, 14. I'm like, no, it was well before chapter 13. Okay. Yeah, in chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, he says, my Lord, send someone else. That's the phrase that he says, and the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. This is the first time, unless I'm mistaken, and I could be, but I think this is the first time that the anger of the Lord burns. Yeah, Jeff?
Well, I just question because the New American Standard in verse 13 uses, but he said, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will. So it doesn't seem, I mean, as the way this translation reads, it doesn't seem that serious, but it is. But I mean, it's just kind of the way that this translation makes it read.
Yeah, I didn't look at the Hebrew of this or anything, except to say the anger of the Lord burned against him. So it really doesn't matter what your translation says. What he's saying is, I won't do this. I mean, that's the message. That's what he's saying is, nope, it's not me. Find somebody else. Whether it be the New American Standards, do it by whomever you want to, but it's not me is the thing. Find somebody else. And that just, nope, forget it. I'm not going to do it. That is what brings about the anger of the Lord. The excuses, no big deal. And he comes up with all kinds of excuses. And God's like, don't worry, I got you. All right? I'll take care of this. But it's just the absolute rejection that says no. That is what brings about the anger of the Lord. By the way, does Moses do it? Yes. So, we know that he's going to end up going back. And it is interesting. We're not going to take the time to delve into everything from this whole Exodus narrative, all the dialogues that take place, and the way that he comes back and he tells his people, hey, I got good news for you. Your cries have been heard. God is going to bring you out. Go to Pharaoh and let him know that we're going to go out. And so they go to Pharaoh and they ask to walk out of Egypt and worship their God in the wilderness. And Pharaoh's like, oh, you guys got time to do that? It sounds like you just need more work. How many of y'all had parents like that, by the way? You asked to do something and they're like, do you have free time? Well, let me fill that with some work then, right? That's the idea. That's kind of what Pharaoh is. It's for Pharaoh, it's kind of a crowd control type of a thing. He's kind of putting the clamp down. And who do the people then turn on? Okay, the people come back to Moses and Aaron, and they're like, what are you doing? You're ruining our lives. You are making us, and literally, I think, making us smell bad in Pharaoh's nostrils, which is a way of saying you are making us, making life a whole lot more difficult for us. Does that sound like the Exodus generation to you? That when something doesn't work right, they get upset and they turn on Moses? Oh, wait, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, that sounds exactly. It starts way back here from the very beginning when Moses says, hey, we're getting you all out of here. And they're like, great, yay, let's do it. And then they go and they're like, no, life is horrible. Now things are worse because now we have to make bricks, without getting all the proper materials. We have to go and find the materials and ourselves and keep up the quota. And then, to whom does Moses turn and say, what gives? He turns to God and he says, God, what's going on? I don't understand this. And so you get to chapter 6. And in chapter 6, in verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, let me just go up a couple verses into chapter 5, verse 22. Moses turned to the Lord and said, Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you even send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's done evil to the people. You have not delivered your people at all. Now, how many of y'all, when you think of Moses coming back and leading the people out, you have this picture in your mind that Moses realizes that this is a long haul situation? He knows, you think, oh, he knows exactly what God's going to do, how long it's going to take, and anybody ever think that way? I do. I mean, how many of y'all think about Moses coming back and he assumes that he's going to walk in, he's going to talk to the people, and they're going to walk out? Any of y'all think of it that way, that that's what's going on in Moses' mind? Yeah, I don't. This to me is kind of enlightening, that he comes back and he says, God, what are you doing? You said that I was going to deliver the people, and the opposite has happened. This is the very first encounter. We're right here at the very beginning, and even Moses is like, I don't understand what's happening right now because this isn't what you promised. You get into chapter 6, the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of this land. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, or Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. Moreover, I've heard the groanings of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves. I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the people of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people. I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. So this is now what begins to bring about the Exodus, what we call the Exodus. Yes, the Exodus from Egypt. All right, so this is now the promise, and you see this played out as we continue through. We're not going to go through all of the plagues. I'm going to assume that you are relatively familiar with the plagues. And, it starts with the water, all the drinking water and the available water, the Nile River, everything that's life-giving turns to what? All right, turns to blood. And so what was usable is now no longer usable. Does that make sense? So that's how it starts. And then you just have a bunch of plagues that really are directed not only economically on the Egyptians, hurting them in their fields, their produce, their persons, their cattle and everything, but each of them also will correspond, you can find, to some kind of Egyptian god to demonstrate that God, Yahweh, is the supreme over the others. What I do want to do, though, is move to chapter 12 and focus on the last of the plagues, which does carry a huge significance moving forward all the way through the Old Testament into the New Testament. So what's the last one? What's the last plague? All right, the death of the firstborn in all the land of Egypt. So, Exodus chapter 12. We're going to start just there in verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month will be for you the beginning of months. It will be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of the month every man shall take a lamb according to their father's house, a lamb for a household. And if the household's too small for a lamb, he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each one will take account for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep, from the goats. Keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then," verse 7, "they shall take some of the blood, put it on the 2 doorposts, and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread, and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head and its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night. I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." All right, let's break this down, and let's talk about this. Again, I'm going to assume we're all probably familiar with this story, probably heard this one a time or two from the ages of some of the little ones up here all the way through. So let's talk about this. What are the key parts of this narrative? What are the key parts of this story? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well. Okay. I wouldn't consider that to be a key part of the narrative, though. You're digging a little deeper than where I'm trying to go here. We're pretty shallow with this. I just want what are the key components of what we're talking about here? Yeah, Kathy? Okay, you need a lamb, right? And not just a lamb, but what? Okay. A male lamb that is unblemished, right? Perfect. A perfected lamb. Okay, what else? Okay, very good. You have from the lamb, the blood is to be extracted, and then the blood is what? Okay, all right. So that blood is then to be applied. Where is the blood applied? Okay. So let's say you got your front door here, right? So you would sprinkle the blood on there. You would sprinkle the blood on the lintel going across, and then the doorpost there. And so you take the blood, and you're sprinkling the blood is really the idea, that you sprinkle it on all of that. Why? Okay, but what does the blood accomplish? Yes? Okay. Okay, so you won't be hurt. The effect is The salvation of whom? The salvation of the firstborn, right? Because all of the firstborn in the houses throughout Egypt are going to be killed. So the application of the blood, the effect of it is the salvation of the firstborn in that house. All right, everybody follows that. But what does the blood itself do? The blood is a what?
Verse 13 says it is a sign.
All right, so the blood, the application of the blood is a sign. It signifies something. So that when the destroyer, if you want to call it the angel of death, whatever phrase, term that you want to use for this, when the destroyer comes and he sees that, what happens? All right, he passes over it. I'm kind of setting you up on this one. Because, yes, that is, in fact, until very recently, that is exactly the answer that I would give. Interestingly enough, even though your translation calls this the Passover, every translation does. It doesn't matter. Every one. There are two different words that are used in this section that are translated as Passover. One of them is the word that we're very familiar, or the word that means to pass over something. And when he uses that, he says, I'm going to pass over the land of Egypt. You know, I'm going to go through the land of Egypt. That's where you actually see the word Passover. And the other one, the word where it's used elsewhere in the Old Testament, actually has nothing to do with passing over anything. In fact, in all of the other applications, it is either something about striking, hitting something, pushing back against something, or protecting, defending something. The other places where you see the word that is the noun Passover. You know, what we call this. I don't know, having gone through this, I don't know why that word has been chosen as the English word to use for this. And there's no way to change it. I'm not advocating that we start calling it anything else or anything like that. You know, there's no reason to, except to understand that it's not a matter of seeing the sign and passing over the house. It's that the destroyer sees the sign and realizes that that house is what? That house is protected. He doesn't have access to it because, and this is where I think it's important, you may say, well, what's the difference? The difference is that a house protected means there's a protector that stands between that house and death. And that's what God does. It's not as if God is just out there as a passive individual and then just very passively this angel goes through and he sees it and he goes over and goes on to the next, or whatever the case is. God actively stands between the destroyer and the house when that is seen. Does that make sense? This is an active God who protects, who stands and who does what he's supposed to do as the protector for his people. So that's what's happening when you see this. And again, it's difficult because it is so ingrained in our minds that, just like Connie said a second ago, is the answer that I have said my entire life. What happens when the angel sees, or the destroyer sees the blood? He passes over, hence the name Passover. Except that's not actually necessarily the case. But the end result when it comes right down to it, the end result is the same. Does the firstborn in that house end up dying? No. Because they did this. Now, what about this meal? All right? You have this lamb who's going to be eaten in a certain way, right? What's this meal like? How is this lamb supposed to be eaten? Okay. Okay. Roasted. What else? Okay. All right. So we'll have that. Okay. Eat, hastily. Yeah, Ryan. Okay. So, sandals, loins girded, the staff in hand. All right. Very good. What do you do with the leftovers? All right. No leftovers. Which, that's a big deal in our house. You don't want to burn the leftovers in our house, because we kind of need those, right? Generally speaking, when we have them, of course. It's gotten to the point we don't have nearly as many leftovers anymore for some reason as we used to. All right. What does all of this indicate? All of this is painting a picture, isn't it? What's the picture that we're seeing here? Okay, you're getting ready to go. Everything is done hastily. You have your sandals. You're eating with your sandals. And by the way, this is obviously an object lesson type of a thing. I mean, yes, you do it, but they're doing it to kind of make a point. They do it, their loins girded. I'm not sure what the translations, that's just what I have in my head, probably from the New American Standard. I don't remember what the ESV said. But what does it mean to have your loins girded? All right, you're ready to move, right? Because you would have robes or whatever that would hang down, would obstruct, so you tie them up around your thighs, and then you have freedom of mobility. That's the idea of girding your loins. Your staff in your hand, you get rid of all your Why do you get rid of the leftovers? Why do you burn them all up? Because you're not going to need them. Why not? Because you're leaving. You're getting out of Dodge, right? That's the whole point of all of this. He says you're going to eat this in a certain way that is indicative that you're heading out quickly. You're not going to be around very long. All right, so let's just play the speculation game for just a moment. Got a couple questions here. What if you got a family and they did all of this stuff perfectly? They drained the blood out, they put it by the door to make sure that they made the application, they roasted it and did all of this, and they went to bed that night, but they'd forgotten to take the blood and sprinkle it all over this. Now, obviously they meant to. I mean, their heart was in the right place. It was just a little oversight. That would be okay, right? Okay, why would you say no?
Why would I think it would not be okay for them to do it? Because God had given them a specific command of what to do and what is somebody, in my understanding, is that without.
Okay, hold on, Jeff. This is longer. I can't repeat this back, so you're going to need to say this in the mic. There we go.
Okay, the thing is that God had told them specifically things to do, and that He intended for them to do them, and He's saying that if you accomplish this, then the destroyer is not going to come in to take the life of the firstborn son.
Okay? All right. So I'm going to restate what you said, except to spin it in a very negative way. What you're saying is that God wants to punish them for not doing what he said to do. He said to do it, and so they didn't, so he's going to punish them for that.
Like he did to Moses when Moses didn't bring the water out correctly. If he did it to them, he did the same thing to Moses, not justifiably.
Okay. All right. So you're referring to the second striking of the rock incident towards the end of Moses.
Prevented him from entering the land. So if both are equal and both seems to be equal to what you're saying, then he's being mean to these people because they didn't paint the whole thing like he asked them to, then he wouldn't have been justified in doing what he did to Moses.
Okay. All right. Go back. Sue had a hand up.
If they don't have the blood on the lintel, then their house is not distinguished from any other Egyptian home.
Okay. All right. I'm going to come back to that. Kelly, do you have a hand up?
This destroyer, this angel of death, is going to kill the firstborn son and the firstborn animal of everything in Egypt. Everybody. Doesn't matter if you're an Israelite or an Egyptian or another foreigner. You're going to die. Someone in your family is going to die that night, and your cattle are going to die that night, unless you do this. And this was, do what I said and put the blood on the mantle, and I will protect you.
Yes. Yeah, which I think kind of goes back to what Sue was saying. And I want to come back. What was, oh, go ahead. We got Ryan over here.
Chris, I think this is an issue of faith, and the sign of your faith, in this instance, is going to be the blood on the doorpost, and it's also going to make this action a priority, right? You're not going to forget it. If this is a matter of faith for you, for the individual in this circumstance, then putting the blood on the doorpost is going to happen.
Okay. All right, I can see that. Although in my particular question at this point would be people who have faith, they just had a lapse of remembering. You know, they put the blood out there, and let's say that, in our house, Sean's our firstborn. I'm like, Sean, this is on you. It's your job. And he forgets to do it. He meant to. It wasn't a lack of faith. Everybody, was in this, but it just forgot to do it. Yeah, Kelly?
Maybe this isn't the right way to look at it, but I guess I would say we don't know. I mean, we're told that they're certainly supposed to put the blood on there. So what everyone's saying, that the firstborn could be killed, I would say is certainly a possibility. But like a lot of things, I ultimately don't know what God would decide to do with that.
Yeah, and that's what you run into anytime that you go play on the playground of speculation. You're not going to necessarily have every answer. But I want to go back to what Sue said, because I think there's something to it. The blood is a sign. What does that mean? This is not a trick question. He has to see the blood, right? Without the blood there, this is not a situation in which there's a call that has to be made. It's not like the destroyer is going around and having to say, okay, well, let me think about this house and let me weigh some things. This is a very objective, black and white scenario. Is it there? Is it not there? The blood is the sign. And if it's there, then he knows that this is a protected house. If it's not there, the sign is not there. Therefore, it doesn't matter anything else that's taken place. I would say the blood is the sign. That being the case, let's have some more speculation fun. What if you have some folks who are Egyptian and they look out their door and they see these crazy Israelites are taking animal blood and putting it all over their doors? And they come out and they say, so, yeah, Jedediah, what's up with this whole blood thing? And they explain and they tell them exactly what was said. And they say, I've seen the water turn to blood and return back. I've seen the frogs. I've seen the lice. I've seen, the pestilence, the hails. I've seen enough to know that if this God says something, maybe I should listen to it. And so they say, hey, can we join you? Can you share your meal with us? Can we take some of that blood and put it on our own doorpost? Are these God's people, these Egyptians? No. So, what if Egyptians followed these directives and they put the blood up on their doorposts and their lintels, but they're not Israelites? Do you think they would have had the same salvation that the Israelites have? Okay, we got a hand up here, Mike. John. Yeah, what you got, John?
I think it poses the same question that Jesus was asked by these Gentiles that came to him, and in their interaction, they said, well, even the dogs have the right to come and eat the scraps off the floor. I think that, am I correct in that instance, where they were wanting the favor as Gentiles that the Jews were receiving, and Jesus acknowledged their faith?
Yeah.
So I think there's a strong sense that in your question there that if people would, if the Lord would come over and see that they had dropped the hyssop into the blood, struck the doorpost, as it says in the King James, not sprinkle it, I don't think. It's the first act of graffiti. They saw it across town, all these people with this bright red blood on, just like across town, the railroad tracks in our neighborhoods right now. And then if the others found out what the benefit was, and they did it also, the Lord says, when I see the blood, then I'll cause this agent of mine not to strike that house. Mm-hmm. He didn't say which house. He didn't say, well, just because you're a Gentile, I'm not going to grant it to you. He didn't say that. It's not in there. And that may be the situation that Jesus was in with answering the Gentiles. In his time, it was to the Jews first. We know that. But he was finding favor with those who were coming to believe in his name.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And also going with what Jonathan just said, what's the blood? It's a sign. Did he say, if I see the blood on an Israelite house? No, he says, if I see the blood on the house, right? That's what it is. And I say sprinkle because it's done with the hyssop branch. And there's a theme of sprinkling with hyssop that is pulled out by the Hebrew author. So that's why I stress that over.
Look at that, because in the King James it says, I want you to strike it.
Yeah.
I want you to strike it on the doorpost, and when I see it on the doorpost.
Yeah. Yeah, not that we don't need to worry about this discussion. I was just saying. So when they see this blood, whether it be Israelite or Egyptian, if the blood is there, then what does the destroyer come in and take the firstborn? I would say no. Because it's the blood that is the sign. This is an either-or scenario. This is, if Kevin were here, this might be what he calls the go, no-go gauge, or something like that. I hope I said that right. He'll correct me if I didn't. It's either there or it's not. And that's what we're dealing with. Mike, over here. Dale.
Just a short question.
Where did the Egyptians get the blood?
What's that?
Where did the Egyptians get the blood
Get what blood?
in that scenario?
They would join in with the Israelites. Remember, because
So they offered a sacrifice
Yeah.
from a perfect lamb also?
yeah, or they would join in with their neighbors, because that's an option too. You know, if you don't, if your house you don't have lambs or whatever, some of y'all can get together, you know, and have one that you could use, you know, enough to account for how many neighbors you have getting together to do this. But yeah, go ahead.
It just it makes me think of prayer. How can I say this? We don't pray because God needs to know.
Mm-hmm.
We pray, God already knows. And I guess my thought is that in this case, he already knows their hearts. He knows what they believe in him. He knows if this blood they had came from a proper sacrifice. I'm just thinking out loud.
Okay, and that kind of goes back to what Ryan was saying earlier about, you know, a demonstration. This is an opportunity for a demonstration of faith itself. You know, but I would say that there is an element here that isn't even a demonstration of faith as much as, don't get me wrong, yes, it's a demonstration of faith, but the sign is the blood, and it's either there or it's not there, seems to be the indicator. All right, so moving forward then, the angel or the destroyer, however you want to look at it, comes through, and who's affected? Okay, very good. Olivia said the people who don't have blood over their door or around their door, they're affected, including, namely, the Pharaoh himself. And this is the moment where the Pharaoh calls them in and he's like, I'm done. This is enough. Go. Leave. Now, there's a couple things that I think it's really important to point out. First of all, the end of chapter 12. Verse 50, all the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, and on that very day the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their what? All right, some of y'all have hosts. Anybody else have anything else? What do you have, Joshua? Well, no, not necessarily. That's a common phrase that you see. But the people are brought out. What's another word for hosts? Nobody? Armies, yeah. All right, I'm looking for armies. What does that indicate then? Because I think that's very, very significant that he brings Israel out by, you know, and the idea, the picture that you're supposed to see is by their armies, their regiments, is the phraseology that's used. Yeah, Mike?
Mine says divisions.
Okay, divisions, which is another military term, right? You have your regiments, your divisions, your corps, your armies. You know, any of those would work in this scenario. In other words, this plague is not just simply a matter of them leaving, but they leave as if they are what? As if they are an army. And by the way, what are they leaving with? Plunder. Remember, they were given stuff. They were supposed to ask, you know, before this, prior to this, and we didn't talk about this, but they were supposed to talk to their neighbors, and they were to gather various gifts and things that were given to them. And so they leave as armies with plunder, which means that they're leaving as a what? As a victorious army. That is the picture that we're supposed to see. God leads them out, and it's not just that he's bringing his people out of Egypt, he is bringing a victorious army out of Egypt. And by the way, has there been a great military defeat that has taken place? Yes. Yeah. In what way? We got a hand back there. What is the great military defeat that's happened for Egypt? Kelly.
Well, this morning, Jeff told us about God, our banner, but the fact is that Pharaoh, the commander of the mightiest, like it'd be like us today, bowed his knee and said, "Yeah, you can do what you came in here and said you wanted to do in the first place. I'm done. I quit." Mm-hmm. And if we took the time to go through the plagues, he had systematically destroyed the gods of Egypt with those plagues as well.
Yeah. Consider this as well. Who's killed in the land of Egypt? Okay, the firstborn of every family, yes? Okay, so especially in Pharaoh, the firstborn, who was going to be what? The next Pharaoh, the next leader over all the armies. And in a family who is generally, go ahead, Josie, what were you going to say? Well, he was not the firstborn in his household. His son, he's the head of the household now, and so the firstborn of his household would be his son. It didn't affect you if you were the head of the household, whatever order that you were, but it would affect those within your household. So, the firstborn, generally speaking, your firstborn, for those who are in places of leadership, military and all of that, they are the ones who are given the training. They're the ones who are given the honor. They're given the opportunities for glory. Basically, by killing all of the firstborn, God is wiping out the entire future leaders, military leaders in Egypt. He's taking the entire army, the future army in Egypt of the firstborn in all the houses, the ones who would have received and been given the honor of the first place honor of military training and expertise, all of them wiped out in a single night. This is the destruction of an entire army that takes place in one evening. And then they leave as a victorious army. These people who were slaves have now overthrown this army, and they leave with plunder. Yeah, Lorraine? It's coming. All right, what you got?
This is also the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham, made 430 years before that. In Genesis 15, verses 13 and 14, God said to Abram, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions."
Yep, that's exactly right. And remember, we talked about that very passage last week, and we brought that up, and we talked about how God brought them out of it, because the wickedness of the Amorite wasn't yet complete. But now it's time to bring them out, and they will do so with, as Lorraine just read, with many possessions. All right, we're going to stop there. Next week we're going to get into the Red Sea narrative, and from there follow them into what will be our third key passage of the Old Testament. What's our first key passage again? Anybody remember? All right, Genesis chapter 3. What's the second key passage? Genesis chapter 12. We're going to next week get into the third. Well, we might next week get into the third key passage, and that's going to be Exodus chapter 24.